in terms of initiating the back and forth between the three of us, it just scratches the surface. But Bert, you ended with the image of us going forward, holding hands together, and it's a powerful image. I think one of the things that I have been struck by in these conversations is the strength of that togetherness, but also the real challenge of difference, and the challenge of conflict. That oftentimes when we think about moving forward, it's easy to become rather conflict averse and to sort of simply have an image. I'm not saying you're doing this, but of, sort of marching together into the future. And what I think our conversations have pulled up for me are the points at which there actually are real differences between our traditions that stretch and pull. It's also true, I have to say, in my case, when I think of moving forward, standing next to a far right-wing Christian who's burning Qurans in Florida, I have a very difficult time thinking about marching forward with that Christian. So could you both just reflect a little bit on the place of that real space of conflict and difference?
Well, let me just say that's part of the strange progression of events since September 11th, because what you're speaking about is a tragedy that initially was perpetrated by terrorists from outside of the United States on all Americans, that over time became an internal division within American society itself. And now we're talking about healing the divide among each other. I remember after September 11th, the people used to say, we can't let the terrorists win. That was, appealing to our better angels. If we change who we are, we'll let the terrorists win, because terrorism is ultimately aimed at changing society. Its primary target is not the individuals who are killed, but changing the nature of society. And it happened to some extent, so that now, we're not going to heal with people who are committed to terrorism, or the actual perpetrators of this. Now we're talking about trying to heal the new wounds that were created in the wake of our reaction to that. And I think that's part of the complexity of this whole situation.
Which is our wounding of each other in very real ways.
First of all, let me own up to a charge well made. I am conflict averse. I would rather there be no conflict in the world. I would rather we could all hold hands and sing Kumbaya. An astute reporter and I once had a conversation about why the U.S. media does not report all of the good interreligious dialogue and instead reports on when we snipe at one another. And I said, well, if you had a choice between shooting at each other and Kumbaya, wouldn't you take Kumbaya every time? And he looked at me cynically and had the grace to admit, well, my editor will take shooting every time. And so, but, that's a reality. That is something we have to own. I think Ingrid put her finger on it, that in addition to a terrorist attack, our body politic has been rent. And we need to heal that first. I'm not averse to the fact that we are at war with terrorists. I would prefer, though, that it wasn't a war with all of Islam, and certainly not with our own citizens. I think that our work, our terribly essential work of simply learning to talk to one another, not only to recognize differences, which are real and profound, even between the three of us on this stage. We can easily name issues that will get us at each other, but we choose not to. We choose not to because we need to find what we share in common. We need to build a bond of trust first and foremost. If I can use a bad analogy, it's a little bit like a first first date. Jews, Christians, Muslims, we have to first learn that yes, we really do both like vanilla ice cream, and aren't the Beatles wonderful? Only when we begin on those things and then move to the things that we all share, and indeed we do all share within our religious worldview, only after we've established trust can we begin to turn to the difficult issues that we know divide us. But we still have a long way to go just establishing or reestablishing trust among the various parts of this country. And I think that's our work.
You know, I think about how very often when there's a tragedy in a family, say a beloved family member dies suddenly in an accident, or maybe a child with a mental illness commits suicide, or something like that, how at that moment you would hope the family would come together to support each other, but very often, as pastors know, suddenly the family breaks apart. There's blame, there's guilt, there's accusations, there's the, material and financial consequences of what happened. And I feel that this is where we are as a country. And who is the chaplain, who's the pastor, who's the one who's going to, somehow help bring this family back together? And for me, I felt that certainly a large part of the American faith community has been the most effective presence, in addition to the civil rights community, because there are also people who are there to stop further, very serious violations of people's rights and integrity. But I think, this is a case where we need all hands together, because this is a big family that we're all part of, and we need those different perspectives, because one perspective will not work for everyone. So the different approaches we have are necessary, because we're dealing with a diverse society.
That image of a family that falls apart in the context of a traumatic event, I think, is very powerful. One of the things that happens in those moments is not just that it spins out, but that the past secrets of a family also surge to the surface. And the past is there in ways that you would have hoped you had, not had to deal with. So it wasn't as if we were a happy family as a nation, and then this bad thing happened, and now, there really are centuries of past secrets, so to speak, that are implicated in the centrifugal forces of that.
Can I just speak again to the differences among us, which I think I'm mulling about it. You're right to have named. And I want to hold up as a shining example. I'm not going to talk to you, I'm going to talk to you. I want to hold up as a shining example a book called Trauma and Grace. It happens to be written by Serene. The reason I want to hold it up for you is I read that book and it was utterly alien to me in its idiom. It's all about the grace of Christ walking at my side. As a Jew, this is not part of my vocabulary. It was about a Calvinist read of the Psalms. As a Jew, I don't think of the Psalms as Calvinist, I think of them as mine.
Well, you're just wrong. No, I'm not.
But the reason I'm holding the book up is that I knew you, and I understand your stance in the world. And as a result, the book to me was a beautiful book. It wasn't my idiom, but it was a message I needed to hear nonetheless. To be able to hear the other is an extraordinarily difficult task. We hear only our own voices. We hear only within our own echo chamber. We only watch those cable channels that reinforce our views. I don't have to repeat that litany. So what a wonderful experience it was, because I'm a good boy and do my homework, that I read your book and was so blessed by it. Even though the idiom is utterly alien, the Torah spoke to my heart. And I think that, that's something we have to learn to do, to hear one another.
We have talked in our conversations about the ways in which 9/11 has marked the whole nation. And I have two questions here that I'd like for us to play with. One is to reflect honestly on the question of how we have been changed in ways that continue to be at some level intransigent. What are those places at which even the best of our intentions in the faith community, the civil rights community, in moving forward, that we have come up against that just feel like they are still sitting there in the room? What are those places that feel still so hard, even with our best intentions?
Well, I think it's still very difficult to talk about the extent to which the United States needs to limit its response to being attacked. That any discussion about the laws of warfare, the new means of warfare, the new means of interrogation, the idea that we need to do whatever it takes, any means necessary to utterly rid us of any possibility of a threat is difficult for me as a Muslim to engage in that conversation, because there's not the benefit of the doubt for many of us. It's, you must somehow be sympathizing with those people. If I say, to me, the U.S.-sponsored torture has rips me apart. It absolutely rips me apart. I remember when I heard about, just dry, I'm not breaking up yet. When I heard about waterboarding and what it was and how it was done, and not only heard about it, but heard it being justified. My beloved brother, I was the sixth in the family, he was the seventh, the youngest. He drowned in a kayaking accident. And I remember when he drowned, and I used to be a competitive swimmer. For a year, I couldn't go in the water. And even when I took a shower and the water went on my face, I'd start catching my breath, like I couldn't breathe. Mm-hmm. I remember when I found out about waterboarding, all that came back to me. And it brought in his death, the way he died, and this kind of reaction. You talk about these things being held in the body. I kept getting back to this, not being able to catch my breath whenever water went on my head. And, to me, it's just been, it was wonderful that we were able to establish the National Religious Campaign Against Torture and work with, so many religious leaders. But until now, I'm absolutely, I have to say, I feel really disillusioned in some ways that so many Americans justify that until now, justify torture until now. And I really do have faith in the goodness of American people, but I'm just wondering, what is the level of manipulation of people's emotions that so many people, so many Americans, large numbers, still believe that torture of that nature and others is justified if we do it. Of course, not if other people do it, but if we do it. To me, that's just, it's so difficult.
I want to take that trauma and suggest, for me personally, not for you, that it's two sides of a coin. A certain innocence and I'm not so young, but a certain innocence ended for me on September 11th, 2001. And my emotions, I think to this day, remain much more fragile than they were 10 years ago. My city was attacked, I was attacked. And I think the trauma is still real for me. And as a result, I share Ingrid's upsetment. I share a relived trauma when I think that we, as Americans, could inflict similar traumas, potentially on hundreds, if not thousands, of innocents. I have no illusions. There are evil people in the world, and we need to be at war with them to protect us. But that's not entirely the story as it's unfolded. So I see those as, two unfoldings of the same violence. And that is, it's a burden that I will bear for the rest of my life and have to deal with. Not only am I no longer innocent because I've been attacked, but America is no longer innocent in a way that I chose to believe, despite the past 60 years of American history.
And a related question is, in all of these conversations, the relationship of Jewish, Muslim, and Christian traditions to something called America has been presumed as a kind of unifying space. And we've only begun the conversation of what a national religious liturgy does in the context of our three traditions, religious liturgies, with respect to that future. Any response to that? We are Americans seems to be a very important refrain in finding a way forward, at least in our discussions.
I think, and I'll only speak for me as a synagogue Jew, I think folding nationalism, American nationalism, into our liturgy has an exceptionally different valence for me as a minority religion in America than for you. Serene has heard me characterize her this way once before. She is the man. Right? I mean, she represents white Anglo-Saxon Protestant religion.
John Calvin.
Yes, I mean, the majority religion, as it were. So the valence is really remarkably different. In 1985-86, I was on sabbatical at the University of Cambridge in England. And when I went to the synagogue there, they, like we do in my synagogue, we do a prayer for the President of the United States, and they do what they call the He Who. That's not Hebrew, actually, that's English. He who gave sovereign unto kings, bless our Lady, Queen Elizabeth. And yet, in the body of that prayer that British Jews say every Shabbat, they mention that the British expelled the Jews from England, and then 380 years later took them back. That sensitivity to being a minority religion is interwoven in the liturgy. In my synagogue, we don't talk that way. We haven't been expelled yet. And we embrace with both hands the normalizing process that Jews have experienced in America. If I were to invent a liturgy, it would be an embrace of Islam in that normalizing process as well.
Yeah, I think the minority context is important. I would say that it's very complicated for our community because there has been a kind of inquisitorial spirit. Are you American? Which is more important to you? Being American or being a Muslim? This is comparing apples and oranges. One is my religious identity, one is my political identity. Why should it be either or? So there's been something of that, but I think in response for the Muslim community, there's been, the statement, we are American is not only to reassure, but it's also in a way aspirational. Yeah. We are American. We want to be American. Accept us as American. Won't you let us be American too? There's this very complex unspoken assumptions beneath that. And I think, one of the most positive things to come out of the struggle of the last 10 years is that Muslim Americans have really thought more deeply about what it means to be American, and have been pushed in a way into, I think, an ethics that has more integrity. It's not just about, our community, securing the rights of our community, because we've had all of these partners who've come to stand beside us. Partners from the religious community, partners from the civil rights community, partners from the gay and lesbian community. What does that mean now if I'm going to be an ethical person, and reciprocity is an important part of ethics? Well, what does that mean? We kind of had already, after 2000, gone away from believing that being good Muslim Americans meant that we embraced the agenda of the moral majority. We realized that probably was not the proper place for us, even if we do have some conservative, social values. But we were still, what is it about America that really resonates most deeply with our fundamental principles? And this idea of really honoring the freedom of human beings to choose their beliefs, to choose, who they love, to choose to create the families, whether we, make those same choices or not, that it's different. And so I would say that's probably the thing that makes me feel that we've, sort of salvaged the last 10 years. It's helped us mature tremendously. And that process, that's only happened, though, through our relationships. It's happened because of the people who have been there to help us and be patient with us and be hospitable to us. And it makes me hopeful, really, for an American Islam that can be both, authentic, where we feel we are truly Muslim, but also, truly American at its deepest, most fundamental sense of principles.
In a minute, we're going to hear some bells and some music. And as my last sort of question, it's an odd one to throw out there to us, but just very briefly, we've talked about bodies. We've heard language throughout this that is coming out of music more than anything. What does the future sound like in its best mode to you? What does it sound? And I'll start with that. I still think that for me, in the wake of 9/11, the day that I heard Bruce Springsteen's The Rising, there was something about the sound that brought to a space that had possibility. I just put that out there.
I hope it'll be a little quieter. I hope there'll be less airplanes and drones and helicopters. And, I live in Connecticut, which is sort of the heart of the military-industrial complex outside of Washington. But, whether it's us all looking up overhead in New York, what is that plane doing flying over us, or whether it's the people in Pakistan and Afghanistan, wondering if that drone is going to drop something over their heads or at the next village. I just really hope it's a little bit quieter.
A number of years ago, my wife and I were in Berlin, and we took advantage of the closeness of Berlin to Leipzig to get on a train on a Sunday morning and go down to the Thomaskirche in Leipzig, where, unusual for me, I don't usually go to church on Sunday morning. We sat through the prelude and then the cantata in the very church that Johann Sebastian Bach was the cantor. And I confess freely that was one of the most moving religious experiences of my life. So I like the sound of the future long-term and, in fact, short-term to be the sounds of Bach. But I also agree with Ingrid. There's another sound which is incredibly precious to me now, right here. And that's if we all just take a moment of listening to the ambient noise of traffic and normal life in Lower Manhattan. Now, 10 years later, we can appreciate it.
In the space of that silence, as we listen to it, we are very fortunate this evening to have a chance to hear the bell of hope, which was given to the city of New York and St. Paul's on the anniversary of 9/11 from the city of London. Every 9/11 in the morning, it is rung. What we will hear this evening is called the Fireman's Peal, which is rung in honor of all of those who lost their lives in the event. And this evening, it will be rung by the Reverend Mark Buzito Jones, who is the priest of pastoral care and community at Trinity Church. And it is rung this evening for us gathered here as well in the future that we imagine. So if you would please stand with me and face the back.